It only lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes that would completely redefine what it means to stand up to power in the halls of Congress. James Comer thought he had Jasmine Crockett exactly where he wanted her. Cornered, defensive, and ready to back down like so many others before her. He was sitting there with that smug expression, wielding his chairman's gavel like a weapon, completely convinced that this young congresswoman from Texas would crumble under his pressure. But what happened next would become the most epic takedown in congressional history, and Comer, he had absolutely no idea what was about to hit him. When Jasmine Crockett stood up that day, something shifted in the room. You could feel the electricity crackling through the air, tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. But here's what nobody saw coming. The woman who was about to deliver the verbal destruction of a lifetime had been preparing for this moment her entire career. And James Comer, he was about to learn the hard way that you never ever underestimate a civil rights lawyer from Dallas who's had enough of your nonsense. Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon in the House Oversight Committee. The fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead, creating that sterile government building atmosphere we all know and hate. Staffers are shuffling papers, checking their phones, probably thinking this is just another routine hearing that nobody will remember by dinner time. Boy, were they wrong. James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Kentucky Republican, career politician who's made his reputation on conducting aggressive investigations, he's in his element. This is his house, his rules, his show. Across from him sits Jasmine Crockett, freshman congresswoman from Texas, former civil rights attorney, and someone most Americans had never heard of until this moment. The power dynamic seemed obvious to everyone in that room, seemed being the operative word. But there was something about the way Crockett was sitting that should have warned Comer. Something in her posture, in the way she was taking notes, in the calm before the storm that experienced trial lawyers know so well. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't intimidated. She was calculating. And Comer was about to become her case study in how to destroy someone with nothing but words and righteous indignation. James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Kentucky Republican, career politician who's made his reputation on conducting aggressive investigations, he's in his element. This is his house, his rules, his show. Across from him sits Jasmine Crockett, freshman congresswoman from Texas, former civil rights attorney, and someone most Americans had never heard of until this moment. The power dynamic seemed obvious to everyone in that room, seemed being the operative word, but there was something about the way Crockett was sitting that should have warned Comer. Something in her posture, in the way she was taking notes, in the calm before the storm that experienced trial lawyers know so well. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't intimidated, she was calculating, and Comer was about to become her case study in how to destroy someone with nothing but words and righteous indignation. What triggered this legendary confrontation? It wasn't what you think. It started weeks earlier with a series of investigations, accusations, and political maneuvering that had been building pressure like a volcano, ready to explode. See, Comer had been conducting what he called oversight, but what Democrats knew was really a political witch hunt, designed to damage the Biden administration. Week after week, hearing after hearing, he'd been using his chairman's position to grandstand to score political points, to make headlines. And Crockett, she'd been watching, learning, taking notes. The specific moment that lit the fuse happened when Comer made a comment about Democrats not understanding how real investigations work. It was condescending, it was dismissive, and it was directed specifically at the younger Democratic dominants of the committee. You know, the ones he thought he could intimidate, the ones he assumed would just sit there and take it. Jasmine Crockett was not one of those people. But here's what makes this story so incredible. Crockett didn't just snap and go off script. This wasn't an emotional outburst or a loss of control. What happened next was the result of decades of preparation, years of facing down hostile opponents in courtrooms, and a lifetime of refusing to be underestimated because of her age, her gender, or her race. James Comer was about to get a masterclass in why you never underestimate a woman who's had to fight for everything she's ever achieved. The tension had been building for months. Every time Comer dismissed a Democratic member's question, every time he cut someone off mid-sentence, every time he used his gavel like a weapon to silence opposition voices, Crockett was filing it away. She was studying his patterns, his weaknesses, his tells, like a chess grandmaster planning moves 15 steps ahead. She was preparing for the moment when she could strike back with devastating precision. And then came the comment that broke the camel's back. "Comer, in his typical condescending tone, suggested that perhaps the Democrats on his committee should spend less time making speeches and more time understanding how real Oversight works. The room went quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Staffers stopped shuffling papers. Even the stenographer looked up from her machine. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. Crockett slowly placed her pen down on the table. She looked directly at Comer, not with anger but with the kind of cold calculation that trial lawyers perfect over years of practice. Then she asked for recognition from the chair. Comer, probably thinking he was about to get another routine objection or parliamentary question, recognized her. He had no idea he'd just handed her the rope she was about to hang him with. "Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice steady and controlled, "I want to make sure I understand your position correctly." Already you could sense this wasn't going to be a typical congressional curls. There was something in her tone, something that suggested she was about to turn the tables in a way nobody was expecting. Comer, still confident in his position of power, nodded for her to continue. What happened next was like watching a master surgeon perform an operation, precise, methodical, devastating. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't pound the table. She didn't resort to the kind of theatrical grandstanding that we're used to seeing in congressional hearings. Instead, she systematically dismantled everything Comer had built his reputation on with surgical precision. "You want to talk about real oversight?" she continued, pulling out a folder that nobody had noticed her preparing. "Let's talk about real oversight. Let's talk about the hundreds of hours and millions taxpayer dollars you've spent on investigations that have produced exactly 0 indictments, 0 convictions, and 0 evidence of the crimes you claimed you were investigating." The room was dead silent now. You could feel the shift in energy, like when storm clouds gather before a hurricane. Comer's confident smile was beginning to falter. He was starting to realize that this wasn't going according to his script. But Crockett was just getting started. What came next was a methodical destruction of everything Comer had done as chairman. She cited specific dates, specific hearings, specific instances where he had abused his power or wasted taxpayer money. She had receipts for everything, and she was serving them one by one like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "Mr. Chairman, you've called 47 hearings in the past year," she continued, consulting her notes with the precision of someone who had done her homework. "Can you tell this committee and the American people what concrete results those 47 hearings have produced for the families in your district who are struggling with healthcare costs, housing costs, and the cost of putting food on the table?" It was a brilliant rhetorical trap. If Comer answered honestly, he'd have to admit that his political theater had produced nothing of substance for the people he was supposed to represent. If he deflected or attacked, he'd look defensive and prove her point about his lack of substantive accomplishments. Comer tried to interrupt, tried to use his chairman's privilege to shut her down, but Crockett was operating within parliamentary rules with the skill of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Every time he tried to cut her off, she calmly reminded him that she had been recognized and was entitled to her time. It was parliamentary jitsu at its finest. His own rules against him. "Furthermore, Mr. Chairman," she continued, her voice never wavering, "you want to lecture Democrats about understanding oversight? I spent 8 years as a civil rights attorney conducting real investigations that actually resulted in real justice for real people. I've obtained real settlements, real convictions, real change. What I haven't done is waste taxpayer money on political theater designed to generate Fox News soundbites." The phrase Fox News soundbites landed like a surgical strike. It was perfectly crafted to highlight the difference between serious legislative work and political performance art. And coming from someone with Crockett's background, someone who had actually won cases and achieved results, it carried extra weight. But then came the moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media. The moment that would turn Jasmine Crockett into a household name and make James Comer the subject of endless memes and mockery. Comer, clearly rattled and no longer in control of the situation, made the mistake of trying to personally attack Crockett. He questioned her qualifications, her experience, her right to criticize his committee's work. It was exactly the wrong move at exactly the wrong time. Because what he didn't know was that he had just walked into the verbal equivalent of a buzzsaw. Crockett paused for just a moment, letting Comer's words hang in the air. Then, with the kind of calm fury that only comes from years of facing down bullies and racists and sexists who thought they could intimidate her, she delivered the line that would echo through political history. "You come for me, I come for you, Mr. Chairman. And I suggest you remember that before you try to question my qualifications again." The words themselves were powerful enough, but it was the way she delivered them that made them legendary. No shouting, No theatrics. Just stone-cold confidence, and the kind of quiet strength that speaks louder than that amount of bluster. In that moment, the power dynamic in the room completely shifted. Comer, the man with the gavel and the title and all the institutional authority, looked small and petty and weak. Crockett, the freshman congresswoman he'd tried to intimidate, looked like exactly what she was, a force of nature who refused to be diminished. The immediate aftermath was electric. Democratic members of the committee were trying not to smile. Republican members looked like they didn't know where to put their eyes. Staffers were frantically taking notes, and Comer looked like a man who had just realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. But Crockett still wasn't done. Having delivered the knockout punch, she proceeded to systematically dismantle every excuse and deflection Comer might try to use. She talked about the real issues facing American families while he was conducting political theater. She talked about the legislation that wasn't being passed while he was chasing conspiracy theories. She talked about the committees that weren't functioning while he was playing games for the cameras. The American people sent us here to solve problems, not to create new ones, she said, looking directly at Comer. They sent us here to find solutions, not to manufacture scandals, and they certainly didn't send us here to waste their hard-earned tax dollars on investigations that produce nothing but sound and fury. It was a masterclass in political communication. Every word was chosen for maximum impact. Every pause was calculated for dramatic effect. Every gesture reinforced her message of competence versus chaos, substance versus spectacle. Watching it was like watching a master artist create a masterpiece in real time. The clip started going viral within minutes of the hearing ending. Social media exploded with reactions. The phrase "you come for me, I come for you" became an instant meme. Political commentators struggled to find adequate superlatives to describe what they had just witnessed. Even Republicans who disagreed with Crockett's politics had to admit that what she had done was impressive from a purely tactical standpoint. Within hours, the video had millions of views across all platforms. Late-night talk show hosts were incorporating it into their monologues. Political podcasts were dedicating entire episodes to analyzing every word. Twitter was ablaze with reactions, memes, and commentary. And through it all, the central narrative remained the same. Jasmine Crockett had just taught James Comer, and by extension everyone watching, that underestimating her was a mistake you only make once. The long-term impact of this moment extended far beyond a single viral video. For Crockett, it was a coming-out party on the national stage. She went from being a relatively unknown freshman congresswoman to being one of the most recognizable faces in Democratic politics, almost overnight. Speaking invitations poured in, media requests multiplied, her social media following exploded. More importantly, it established her as a serious player in national Democratic politics. Party leaders who had barely known her name before suddenly wanted her on their shows, at their events, endorsing their causes. She had proven that she could hold her own against anyone, and that made her a valuable ally and a dangerous opponent. For Comer, the aftermath was less pleasant. The man who had built his reputation on conducting aggressive oversight hearings suddenly found himself on the defensive. His own committee hearings became less about the investigations he was conducting, and more about if he could maintain control in the face of Democratic pushback. He had learned the hard way that respect has to be earned, not demanded. The broader political implications were significant as well. Crockett's takedown of Comer became a template for how Democrats could fight back against Republican overreach. It showed that you didn't have to accept abuse or intimidation just because someone had institutional power. It demonstrated that preparation, intelligence, and courage could triumph over bluster and privilege. But perhaps most importantly, it sent a message to women everywhere, especially women of color, that they didn't have to accept being diminished or dismissed. Jasmine Crockett had shown that when someone comes for you, have every right to come back twice as hard. And sometimes, that's exactly what it takes to change the conversation. The phrase "you come for me, I come for you" became more than just a political soundbite. It became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed because of their age, gender, race, or background. It was a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room turns out to be the most powerful. In the end, those 6 minutes in a congressional hearing room did more than just create a viral moment. They introduced America to a new kind of political leader, someone who combined the intellectual rigor of a seasoned attorney with the moral clarity of an civil rights advocate and the media savvy of a digital native. James Comer thought he was dealing with just another freshman congresswoman he could push around. Instead, he discovered he was facing the future of American politics, and the future was not impressed with his old-school intimidation tactics. The story of Jasmine Crockett versus James Comer is really the story of what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when intelligence meets courage, and when someone who's been underestimated their entire life finally gets the chance to show the world what they're really made of. And in this case, what they were made of was steel wrapped in silk, delivered with a smile that could cut glass and words that could move mountains. That's the power of being prepared for your moment when it comes. That's the importance of never letting anyone make you smaller than you are. And that's why You Come For Me, I Come For Fu will be remembered long after the specific political context that created it has been forgotten, because it represents something universal and timeless. The moment when the underdog refuses to stay down, and the bully learns that they picked the wrong fight with the wrong person on the wrong day.